This program is funded through a Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network grant provided by the United States Department of Agriculture and administered by the Arkansas Department of Agriculture.
Hello and welcome to this special broadcast, Growing Hope, Combating Stress in Agriculture. The stress farmers and ranchers face every day can be overwhelming, and the numbers show it. Farmers and ranchers fall into one of the top 3 occupations for suicide, according to the CDC. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, stress in the agriculture industry. We will have 2 segments tonight, and joining me for the first segment, we have 2 people who are very familiar with the stress of farm life. Rebecca Simon is an instructor of family life and early childhood at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. Also with me is Jessica Angel. She is a Cleburne County Extension Agent of Family and Consumer Science for the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. Ladies, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us.
You both come from farming families, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let's jump right into this.
Rebecca?
I married a farmer, multi-generational farmer. My dad had cattle growing up, but it was until I moved out to my husband's family farm that I really was, I guess, baptized by fire in regards to that. So I learned a lot from him, and I learned a lot about cattle.
And Jessica, what about you?
I'm a 4th generation farmer. My dad grew up in Cord, and so Arkansas, where we did row crop, pasture. His dad had dairy cattle, and then my mom's father was in the livestock industry, owning sale barns. So my mom always told me that agriculture has always been in my blood, and it always will be.
Absolutely. So obviously you are very, very into this, not only your past, but also you both work for the state. Let's talk about some of those stressors that farmers deal with every day, some that we obviously know about and some that may be a surprise to some of our viewers tonight.
Well, I think the thing that is a stressor is the rising cost, production cost, taking your cattle to get them processed, the processing fees, they increase, fuel prices, fertilizer prices, just operating costs alone could be a big stressor. Also, if you're a family farming operation, there can be good stress and bad stress in regards to working with those family members. But then also think that there might also be some stressors in regards to your health and staying healthy on the farm, and if there's any accidents, those are stressors as well.
Another thing too that we're seeing is as a farmer in row crop, we are constantly looking for inputs, and so that is including labor. So currently right now there's a program where farmers are using to bring in laborers from different countries, and so they're here on a 10-month program, and so that is really huge, because where I'm from, we have to really kind of navigate the waters, and when I say navigate the waters, I'm talking about the Black River. And so currently right now I have property that is not being planted yet, where it would be this time last year, but due to the flooding that we've recently had and all the rain, we just don't have a crop in the ground. And so we are looking at planting rice, and the window for rice is getting pretty thin. This week should be the last week. And so that's another thing with harvest, is planting season and harvesting go hand in hand. And if you don't have the labor to do that, it just makes it a lot more stressful, as well as parts. So farmers right now might be struggling to find parts for their tractors or for their combines, and you just really have to take what you can get in that aspect and basically buy what you can, and it might be market, it might be higher. And then another stressor that Rebecca and I were talking about earlier was just the market fluctuation prices, and making sure that you know how the Ag Watch weekly or daily updates is. You have to be mindful of that, and making sure that you get the most for your dollar. This time last year, I was talking to my farmer, Aaron Turner, and he mentioned that it cost $15 that he had an input, and now it's $45. And with gas prices and fertilizer prices, it's astronomical what these farmers are having to go through.
And we direct market a lot of our beef off of the farm, and so you've got your processing fee costs, but then you also have to figure out what price do you want to sell your fabricated animal out for. And so do you really want to charge as much as you need to in order to make some type of profit or break even? We had storms a few weeks ago. We also had a tornado a few years ago, and we suffered a tremendous loss to our outbuildings and our cattle operation. And so rebuilding from that is a stressor, and rebuilding from we had hail damage, and so trying to repair all of our structures that have been damaged in that storm, that's a stressor as well.
I think what we are seeing, my parents, for example, back in 1976, they planted a crop. They took it was soybeans, and they took it to basically put it at the grain bins. And that company did not pay my parents, and they went bankrupt. So my parents did not get paid for their soybeans that year. My parents were married, just got married, just built a house, and they didn't know how they were going to make their payment. So my dad ended up having to drive a grain truck from Grubbs, Arkansas to Texas and back in order to make the payments. And so I feel they might be more emphasized now than, back then you had the newspaper. You didn't have internet, especially where we're at. We did not have internet, landline phones, things like that. So it was harder communication-wise, whereas we have different media outlets now that we can use. And I think that it might be a different type of stress, but we're still dealing with the Mother Nature. We're still dealing with those prices. Cotton might be high one day and it might drop the next. And so that's something that you have to be mindful of. And I know that that's a stressor in and of itself. I've seen my parents growing up. They didn't show it to me, but now that I'm older, I didn't know that we struggled a whole lot. And so hearing these stories that my mom was telling me has made me very more mindful, very more appreciative, because they stayed up at night when I didn't know that. And so in order to put a roof over my head.
Well, let's talk about some of those ways that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and even now managing stress and coping with it. And you brought it up just now, like a lot of times, and that's kind of what we're talking about tonight is, we have to hide it. I have to hide. I can't let it. I'm strong. I'm a rock. I can't let someone know that I'm stressing or I'm worrying over something. Hey, that's what we're here to talk about. And so let's talk about coping with some of those stresses. What's healthy? What do people do? What do people need to do? Let's talk a little bit about that.
I think healthy coping mechanisms would be meditation, journaling, figuring out what works best for you. That could be exercise, eating well. It could be finding that other farmer or other, someone that you can talk to. There's a common bond there. I think that those are some positive coping mechanisms. Hobbies. What do you like to do in your spare time? Even, if that's taking that 5-minute break in the morning or during the day, just to kind of reflect on yourself and focus on yourself, because the farmer has to be healthy, not just here, but here as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So in order to be sustainable, a farmer's got to be sustainable too as well. Coming from my background, eating a well-balanced meal, I know that's kind of hard because farmers are kind of really on the go. It's a 24/7 job. Growing up, farmers a lot of times they'll miss out things with their families because they're turning off rice wells, they're plowing, they're in the fields, and not just that, but cattle. It's hard to take a vacation. You don't. And so if you do take a vacation, it's probably about an hour or two away. So it's very dependable people to take care of your cattle and just your property in general, but making sure that family time with take that time out and enjoy your kids' ball games, because those don't come back. And so spending that quality time, I know it's stressful, but that's another stress relief. Maybe it's hiking. Maybe we live in the natural state. We have great hiking trails. We have great outdoors for people to go to and enjoy. We have lakes. And that's one, I know we're rural here in Arkansas, but we have so many different avenues for stress relievers that we can really capitalize on.
Farm stress comes in many forms, and one that is nearly universal is financial stress. We visited with Adam Chappell of Chappell Farms and talked about the regenerative farming method he began using to reduce financial costs and substantially decrease the stress in his life.
I farmed in Cotton Plant, Arkansas with my brother Seth. Both kind of went off to college in pursuit of something besides ag and just ended up back here, you know, so just one of those things you think you want to get away from it till you actually do. My family has been farming in this area for 4 generations. Our great-grandfather farmed here on both my dad's parents' side, so we've been in this area for a long time. We were looking for a way to control weeds without spending more money, because everywhere we turned, you know, the answer was more herbicide or more tillage, or there was always a more attached to something. That was actually making things worse. We had to do something different because what we were doing wasn't paying the bills. I was YouTubing organic farmers because I knew they couldn't use herbicide, but I found this guy that was growing pumpkins in cereal rye. I mean, it was just amazing what he was doing. That was in 2009, we planted our first cover crop. It was definitely a turning point for the farm because we were at the edge of the cliff, you know, financially. If we just stayed on the same path we were on, we'd been bankrupt. You know, we'd be done farming. You know, we don't have to irrigate near as often as we used to. That wasn't something we were looking for, it's just something we noticed. Kind of the same thing with the fertility. P&K is a huge expense for farmers. We just don't apply any anymore. We lean on compost that we make ourselves, and we hadn't lost any ground. Actually, we've gained ground. We've actually increased those availability levels, you know, when we soil test. We don't have to spray fungicides as often. We don't have to spray insecticides as often, and I think that has a lot to do with the insect diversity and stuff that we're seeing, just keeping those pests in check. You know, we never saw earthworms here before in the fields, and now they're everywhere. And if you've got those in your fields, you're getting a lot of free access to nutrients that you wouldn't normally. So we're healing it up around here. It's just taking time. Farmer stress and, you know, farmer suicides and things like that, I mean, that's a serious problem. And it's a problem that's tied back directly to the economic environment that farmers are in constantly. We would be so far behind right now this year if we were still farming like we used to, because we would have had to rebuild all our beds and we would have had so many more trips to make. You know, one of the things that I like about this system is costs less to do and doesn't take near the time, employees, and horsepower. That's been a huge plus for me and our family in general. So, me and some other farmers, we started the Arkansas Soil Health Alliance. If you're a farmer wanting to try cover crops or whatever, but you don't know where to start or you've run into a problem, you know, we try to just be a resource for folks if they want it. Chances are, if you've hit a problem or can't figure out how to do something, somebody in that group has run into that same issue, you know, and can offer some help.
And continuing this conversation, Rebecca, I want to talk about managing the financial stresses of farming and ranching.
Well, and unfortunately or fortunately, my husband has left me in charge of our finances. So I will say that I know, you know, just figuring out what your monthly expenditures are, following those basic financial management principles is what I typically do. So figuring out what's coming, what's, you know, going out, what are your fixed expenditures, also what is coming in regards to money. So, you know, we direct market our beef, we sell our beef, and so monthly we have income that comes in to cover any of our monthly fixed costs that we have. I would also say communicating, figuring out what is important. There's certain times of the year that we're going to buy fertilizer and we're going to buy seed to plant, and so budgeting for that throughout the year. I know that if I anticipate in the fall that we're going to have to buy those two things, then in the spring will set aside some money in a savings account and then be able to bring that out and put that into the fund whenever it's time to purchase any of those materials. So communication is important. My husband and I had to figure out our best communication practices between ourselves in regards to farm finances. And so, sometimes I didn't want to have that conversation with him about, hey, we maybe don't need to buy this right now, but it always seems to work out where he's understanding of that. And so a lot of it is that, that open communication, and then understanding what's coming in and going out, and then setting a budget. Like, I know that I have this amount to spend at this particular time, and then if you anticipate that you're going to be over budget, or you need to cut some corners and figure out what you can't spend in that time frame and what you can. That's also important. The beauty of what we do on our farm in regards to we direct market our cattle instead of taking them to the sale barn twice a year. That way we have that monthly income instead of every 6 months, making it work in regards to budgeting every 6 months. We've got something coming in monthly.
So I would hope and think that most families, no matter what industry they're in, they have a budget and they communicate that. I know it's a lot easier for some people and harder for some people, but with so many varying factors in the farming, like you budget this much for this feed, or you budget this much, and then Mother Nature or what inflation or whatever, or the virus, all those things. Whoa, I wasn't expecting that. So those type things that just come at you, how do you then step forward and say, okay, this happened and we were not expecting it, this is how we're going to make up for it? How do you deal with that stress?
I think a lot of that is just having that communication, and if there are other revenue streams for income to come in on the farm, like if that means that you maybe cut your hay and sell to other individuals, to other farmers, then that's a revenue stream. We also, we have savings, and so we're able to pull from that, but that's not always reality. But I think a lot of it is just figuring out where your other revenue streams can come from, and if that is, like I said, cutting hay, or maybe even having to sell some of those cattle now with the intent of hopefully buying back. I think that is also a way that you can combat a little bit of that stress.
A lot of people just the past 2 years have come to be very familiar with the word pivot, and I think that that's a good word to bring up right now. Jessica, what were you going to say about it?
Well, kind of piggybacking off of Rebecca here, a lot of row crop farmers will have dairy cattle or some type of livestock to kind of fluctuate that balance sheet a little bit better, and that's usually during the winter, so to help with that. But again, with rising, a lot of times farmers will grow corn, and they'll use that corn to feed their cattle, or sell that to different markets, and that is something that it's getting tougher and tougher and tougher, because you rely on that so much that you have to make your payments. You have to make your land payments. There is different services out there that people can go to. Their farm service agency, they can contact their county extension office in regards to questions, NRCS, and maybe get some funding. There's a lot of grants out there right now to take, really full advantage of if you can, if you qualify for that. I know personally that we qualified for some of those during COVID and so forth, so I have a very good rapport with one of my farm service agents, and so they are always constantly letting us know what we can and cannot do in regards to that, and that's super helpful because a little bit goes a long way. And one piece of advice that I would give is let go of what you can't control. So unfortunately, that's kind of the times that we're living in with different prices, and it is hard to budget. Just like Rebecca, we don't know what's going to happen with fertilizer and gas prices and diesel prices. And that's another thing that farmers have to deal with. And another thing too is in my area, we've seen where fuel will be stolen out of some of the pumps, and that's not really a good scenario either, because a lot of times we rely on those to water rice, for instance, or drain out of our wells. And if we have no fuel, then that leads to a terrible mess. And so it's hard to manage, and monitoring your fields, I mean, you can't do that 24/7. So it's just really tough right now.
You mentioned some of those resources that people can go to, and that is part of what we are here to talk about tonight, is that you're not alone. I mean, everyone faces troubles and stresses, and we want to share those resources to say, reach out. There is someone. Yes. We are all in this together. If you think that you are alone, you are not. And so I know that we've got some of those resources up on the screen tonight. Rebecca, I want to talk about, well, both of you, but let's talk about the family stress. A family farm is a beautiful thing.
It is.
It is. And a family is beautiful. And then you were just wanting to, I mean, let's talk about that. Let's talk about working with those close family members and how to deal with that.
I always try to think about that the family farm is a business, and so you treat it as such. And so, and also in general conflict management and communicating effectively, taking that emotion maybe out of it and talking about the issue instead of maybe the actions of that person that you might be a little aggravated with. Also, like, I know that trying to just stay, I guess, within what your role is. Like, my husband communicates a lot with his father and his brother and his uncle that are also involved in the farm. So if there's any issues that he's, having, which I couldn't tell you if there was right now or ever has been, but if there,
boundaries.
yeah,
setting boundaries.
Setting boundaries, and also knowing, again, taking the emotion out of it and talking to them, maybe like, this is the issue I'm having, using I statements, like not putting the blame on them, but saying, I feel frustrated whenever I'm working cattle and I don't get any help from you, so when can you help me next time that we're working cattle? And just trying not to, I guess, lose your cool over something. So, but that's what I would suggest.
I think having that open line of communication and setting those boundaries, it is difficult to work with family members. I know that, and I'm younger than my dad, and so a lot of times we might clash a little bit just because of new ideas that I might have versus he had. And he had the same thing with his father, because I asked him about this.
Absolutely.
And I just, for example, he wanted to use a different company, and my grandfather was, this is how it's been type of thing. And so I asked them what they did and how they, solved it, and just said, hey, let's try it this year. And if it doesn't work out, then let's go back to the way it was the year before. And I think having that relationship, it's a family farm, and we want to keep it a family farm in order to hand that on to our, children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And so we might not see eye to eye at all times, but I think we're still family, just like Rebecca said. We're still family. You still love one another. And at the end of the day, you're still going to be family. You're still going to be, you just have to work together and come together.
Important.
Yep.
Absolutely. Ladies, thank you so much. This has been absolutely incredible. Suicide is often treated as a taboo topic, but there are groups trying to change that. AgriSafe and the University of Kentucky are spreading awareness that talking about suicide is the first step to preventing it.
That experience of feeling isolated and that nobody understands somebody is one of the prevailing emotions when people are in suicide crisis. And so that's what QPR does, is it takes away that isolation and hopefully plants those seeds that, that we're here to walk with you through this.
QPR stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer, and it's one type of suicide prevention program that has been recognized by SAMHSA as a best practice, and SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
I mean, personally, I believe QPR is so special because I think suicide is such a taboo conversation. People are scared to talk about it. You know, there's that myth that if I confront someone or if I ask someone, you know, are you having suicidal thoughts? They think that that could push someone to doing that potential act. In QPR, we're trying to take away that myth. We're trying to, you know, educate these people that no, that is not the case. You know, talking about it may be the only thing that could prevent it. It's really giving people an opportunity to learn more about how to navigate that difficult conversation, and hopefully they leave feeling really confident in their abilities to do that.
AgriSafe has actually been around for 20 years in the area of occupational health. And so in a collaboration with the University of Kentucky Southeast Ag Center, they took upon the job of developing this very special QPR and really made it relevant to individuals that work with people in ag. It frames this in terms of agriculture. So the learner learns up front the stressors that are within that population. And then the second half of that training asks the learner to apply those concepts to the QPR method. People feel comfortable, particularly in rural communities and agricultural communities. They tend to reach out to friends, to family, and in our rural communities, they reach out to their spiritual counselors. And so those churches serve as a really main hub, you know, to get people access into care, you know, to be that bridge. If you think yourself, who would I ask? It's going to be somebody that you trust. And so we just want all of those individuals that are in your circle that you could trust, you know, to be ready to sort of field that conversation.
You know, you have another tool in your tool belt. We can always refine our tools. We can always be better with handling our tools. But really what's important is that you have the tool, right? So I wouldn't be so caught up in using the right language, because that'll lessen your willingness, right, to intervene with somebody, because you'll be too worried about that. I think that oftentimes when we feel that way, we're worried about ourselves saying the wrong thing, and sometimes that can overcome, and I say this from my own point of view, overcome our concern for the individual that's in front of us. So if you come from a place of caring, honestly, you can do no wrong. And I also say to people that hindsight is 20/20, right? And again, even with that hindsight, there's no perfect way to engage someone in this conversation, right? Because you can't fix it for them.
Now to talk more about managing stress, we have three new guests. Amanda Welch is a 4-H youth development specialist. Dr. Brittany Schrick, PhD, is the assistant professor and family life specialist at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. And Mandy Davis is a mental health therapist with Cornerstone Counseling Clinic in Nashville, Arkansas. Ladies, thank you all for being here with us this evening. It's a tough topic. It's a touchy subject, but it's very important, and that's why we are here to bring light to it and to show that people are not alone. And so if we all talk to each other and talk with each other, there are ways that we can find help. So let's just get right to it. We're talking about suicide, and that's that's tough. But and in this industry, it's tough because people feel so isolated, and they think I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders. I've got to keep my successful farm. That's not the case. There is help. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Brittany?
Sure. So the stresses of farming, agriculture, living in rural settings, the isolation is a huge part of farming generally. You're kind of by yourself. You might be in the cab of a tractor for many hours a day. You might only interact with several other people. And then also living in small communities. There's the isolation of living in small communities and having access to resources. There's limited access to everything, right? So you're limited to what grocery stores you have. You're limited to where you can shop for clothes. You're limited to having to drive far away to get parts for your machines and things like that. So having those limitations that's not new to folks who live in rural communities, but when it comes to mental health, it can be exacerbated by limitations of everything else. So if you have to go so far away to do everything, mental health is not going to be on the top of your priority list. So I like to say that one of the positive things that came out of the COVID pandemic is the kind of acceptance of telehealth and telemedicine. And so there's been a lot of folks who have accessed resources through telephone and FaceTime and other options like that, telemedicine. And so having those options has been a huge boon for that industry and for folks kind of being able to say, you know what, I don't have to drive anywhere. I also don't have to be seen anywhere. So I can be in my car, I can be in my home. And you know, if I live in Nashville, Arkansas, and I drive into the clinic and somebody sees my truck there and says, hey, what were you doing down at Cornerstone today? What were you there for? If Mandy can talk to them on the phone instead, then that's a huge benefit. So having those resources available is huge. UAMS has a 24/7 helpline that is free and available to everyone in Arkansas, and so it's going to be a huge benefit for those folks who can't maybe get to a clinic in places that are more remote. Mandy, you are with Cornerstone, which covers a large portion of the southern Arkansas area, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And what services do you all offer for people in these that are watching that are like, that is me, how I need help?
Well, we offer an array of services. I mean, we have telehealth services. We offer a lot of anger management, CBT therapies, the different variety of therapies. But the main thing is that we are slowly implanting our therapy seed in each one of the rural areas. And she said something that was very true. A lot of people have that stigma that they don't want to be seen at a therapy clinic because it's almost as if they feel that they've lost control and they have to seek help of someone. So the telehealth services are very, very important. And a lot of people are utilizing those, and they are beneficial. You know, you can FaceTime, you can watch people's gestures, their body language, and kind of get an idea of how they are mentally. But people believe that in rural areas that, you know, those services aren't available, and they are. They're becoming more widespread for availability, and you know, our clinic, like you said, Lauren, we serve a lot of Southwest Arkansas, and we're slowly moving into those areas that people, they know that they've struggled, but they can't quite put their finger of how to get help. You know, and I always say it's kind of the AAA battery. They've got to have awareness, acceptance, and then action. They're aware that they have a problem, and then they've got to accept that they need to seek help, and then the action of doing so. So,
what are some of those specific problems? I want a specific example, if you can, without, you know, of that you hear, that you have on the phone call of someone calling. What do you hear in your line of business that Arkansas farmers are dealing with?
Anxiety. They have a lot of fear of the unknown and fear of failure. And what I do see a lot of coming from a rural area myself is that they have fear of losing their family farms that have been in their families for generations. And, you know, with the rising cost of everything and the uncertainty of our trade, it's very scary to them. And they don't know how to deal with those emotions of the fear of the unknown. Mm-hmm. And so they need that help with coping skills of breathing through it, change of perspective, and redirection of where their thought process is going. And, you know, you focus on their on their thoughts, because you try to aim to change their perspective from negative to more positive thinking, because that creates more positive emotions, therefore it creates more positive behaviors. And you see a lot in rural areas that they get stuck in that thinking, and they have a lot of them struggle with alcoholism because that's their go-to. A lot of farmers struggle with that, and that's their escape. But there is help out there to help you through that in a more positive manner.
Like I said earlier in the show, it's a snowball effect, and you stress, and then you lose your sleep, and then you're not physically capable, and you said breathe through it, which reminded me of yoga, which Amanda, you let's talk about what you do and some of the services that you do with 4-H kids, or I guess any children.
Absolutely. So we have a 4-H yoga program, and we train our agents in other states on the program, and I'm a yoga instructor, and so one of the things with yoga is breathing through your poses. And majority of people, we're an automatic breather, so being conscious of our breathing is so important. So actually using our full lung capacity. A lot of us are just chest breathers and not belly breathers, so we're only using half of our lungs when we use our chest to breathe. So being very conscious of our breathing, learning how to calm breathing, to kind of get yourself in that state of mind of where you're relaxed, where you can go to sleep at night. One of the things that Mandy touched on is having the adults actually trying to be proactive and help coping and finding coping. That trickles down to youth and kids. If they see their parents or that their grandparents are working to overcome some struggles, they're more likely to be open to receive and talk and being open to, trying to work through some stressors themselves that they are having. So yoga also has that physical component to it, to where you can stretch the body, get some mobility. So it's really good for farmers that kind of sit all day long. Our bodies aren't meant to sit for long periods. We're actually supposed to be up and moving. So being able to have that mobility along with it is very beneficial.
Physical stress is common for farmers, like we've just mentioned, and let's take a look at what 4-H is doing to help them relieve physical and mental stress with that yoga program.
I want you to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Focusing on your breathing. Let's breathe in and exhale. Leave all your worries and your stresses on this mat today. And exhale. Very good.
You're focusing on yourself and your poses and your breathing. Always going to warm up our body when we do yoga. So Ms. Jessica, when we go through our poses, she's going to help get our bodies warmed up. And then we're going to go through our routine, and then we're going to do a relaxation and kind of bring our bodies back down and get focused. Turn to your neighbor, and I want you to say, "You got this."
You've got this. With the 4-H yoga, we really work on our breathing techniques, yoga poses, and guided relaxation.
Let's take a big deep breath in, and let's squat down, because we're going to go pick our eggs up at the chicken coop. We're going to go to the front of our mat and kind of get in that farmer's tabletop position.
A lot of us underuse our lung capacity. So using our full belly breathing helps use the full lung capacity, getting more oxygen to our brain.
I want you to picture as if we're in an orchard today, sunny, and the wind is blowing. Very good. Pick all that fruit. Pick all that fruit. Let's come back to center. All right, and then let's smell that fruit. This time I've got some pears. In today's world, people are struggling, and so yoga is actually a form for them to kind of decompress and really just kind of get focused.
Who's going to go home and show somebody in your house the breathing that you did today? Awesome job.
We have several kids that come from farm families. I would say probably anywhere from 60 to 70% of our population.
This is a universal program that can be applied to anybody. With farming, they are sun up to sundown. Sometimes it's 24/7, especially right now. It's great for farmers because it can help with their range of motion. It can help with promoting lean body mass. But at the same time, this is a great way to be calm and relaxed, especially for farmers right now because they're really stressed out. So some of the poses that they can incorporate even on the farm is doing the mountain poses, we call it. Then we can go into what we call the farmer bend. That is where they can stretch their hamstrings out. We want to make sure that we get everything loosened up with a warm up. We can go into the chair pose. They have their hands raised up and they're kind of in a slight bend. That also helps with our quads. Child's pose can work on the lower back as well and making sure that our spines are aligned and just really stretching those muscles. We rely on our farmers here in Arkansas. Yoga is something that they can take with them outdoors and enjoy it, whether they're in the field or they're on the tractor. Yoga is a great time for them to take their boots off and just feel relaxed.
Amanda, that was a great video. Who knew that we were going to have a yoga lesson tonight, right? I do want to say this one thing. So my father was a farmer, and I have to admit he was a stressed farmer. I can't imagine saying, "Dad, take off your boots and do some yoga." How do you break through that when somebody's, "Oh, I'm too tough," or "I don't have time"? How do you knock down that barrier and say no? And it doesn't have to be yoga. It could be another recreational, thing that just makes you feel good.
So what we like to try to do with our kids is kind of teach them some breathing techniques, learn how to actually breathe through, being conscious of their breathing, and then kind of lead into it maybe with more of like, let's do a little bit of a stretch of some sort. Let's bring in our arms up over our heads, bringing our hands back down to our palms. Now we're going to incorporate an inhale and an exhale with that. And that's essentially yoga. So when you put it together and you start forming what we call a yoga flow, then it becomes more of a session. So working on some upper muscles, stretches, lower muscle, and actually being intentional of the breathing in, breathing out, and maybe even holding that pose for a few seconds to really feel that stretch is very beneficial. So there is, some ways that you can kind of guide into it, but there's a lot of benefits to doing yoga.
Absolutely. Okay, we have. We want to talk about the topic of suicide. And Brittany, you've got some statistics that are quite eye-opening, if you will.
I do. So Arkansas, the most recent statistics we have are just from 2020. So they tend to lag behind a couple of years just as the statistics are put together. Sure. But for 2020, Arkansas was in the top third of states in the nation in terms of suicide rate. So the average for the U.S. is 14 suicides per 100,000 residents. And Arkansas's is just over 19, so it's like 19.2. So Arkansas's rate is already higher than average. We can't really say with any accuracy the percentage of those folks who are farmers or who are in agriculture. There are lots of reasons for that. The statistics don't tend to drill down quite that level, and it's really hard to get accurate readings of that sort of thing. But beyond actual suicide completion, there are about 25 attempts per one documented suicide. So we're looking at, in 2020, there were almost 46,000 suicides in the United States. So we're looking at 1.15 million suicide attempts approximately in the United States in 2020. That was actually down. 2018 was kind of the highest year we've had in a long time. But I'll be really interested to see how the pandemic influenced the suicide rate, and we won't obviously see that in its full effect until we get the 2021 statistics. But beyond how suicides affect the individual and the family, it's also going to ripple out into the community. And so for every one suicide, we're looking at about 135 people who are affected. All of these figures come from that QPR training that was discussed in the video. We actually offer that training through Cooperative Extension as well here in Arkansas. And if you're interested in that, you can contact your Cooperative Extension office. We do offer this training for anybody who's interested. But that is a huge impact, right? It's a ripple effect out from the one person. And it tends to be especially severe in small, tight-knit communities. And where do farmers live? Small, tight-knit communities. So for every one, person, it's a huge, broad impact, and it's not a short-lived impact, especially in those tighter-knit communities.
Why? I want to say, why is the stigma? Why do you find people don't reach out for help? Do they think they don't need it? Are they embarrassed? All the above?
I believe it's a little of all the above, but a lot of it is the lack of knowledge. In rural areas, people do not talk about mental health, Lauren, at all. And they know that they struggle with things, but it's just kind of like you just got to get tough and deal with it, and you have to solve your own problems. But they lack the coping skills to do it in a positive manner, so therefore they stay stuck in what I call sickness, where they're not able to be perform on an accurate level of and like lack of sleep, as well as just going through their mind constantly of all the different negative things about farming, and they feel alone. They're isolated. Most farmers are by themselves most of the day. They're on a tractor. I mean, especially in the summer months, they're on a tractor most of the day, baling hay or something along those lines. And they got to be stuck with themselves and thinking. And I believe that if they had more knowledge of different resources, that things could be different. And that's why these programs are so beneficial for people to create more self-awareness and to create more awareness of the different resources available for them.
Speaking of those resources, which I know that several resources will be on the screen this evening, what about the friends and family who are watching and they say, I think that I've got someone very close to me that is dealing with this. I have no idea what to say to them. I'm scared something's going to happen. But I'm not qualified. What do they say, or where do they go?
Well, watching for sort of red flag behaviors or red flag phrases, things like, you know what, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. Or, you know what, I'm worth more dead than alive. So why should I continue to do this? Hearing things like that, a lot of times people will laugh it off and say, oh, you know what, I don't really mean that. Or they'll laugh it off as the receiver of hearing that information and think, oh, there's no
they're just
no
stressed
way.
Or they're just tired.
But those are things that should be taken at face value. If you hear someone say that. And one of the most difficult things you can ever ask someone, but it might save their life, is, are you thinking of suicide? Use the word suicide. Don't say, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Don't say, are you thinking of ending your life? Don't say, you would never commit suicide, would you? Because of course they're going to say no. But say, are you thinking of suicide? Because it's the hardest thing you'll ever say, but it's real hard to hear. And it might save that person's life and make them think, you know what, I didn't realize that's what I was thinking of, but that is what I'm thinking of. If you're really concerned, over half of suicides are firearms related. And so making sure that you know where people's firearms are and that they're accounted for is important. And if somebody asks you, you know what, could you hold my guns for me for a couple of days? Do it, because they mean it. They wouldn't ask you to if they didn't mean it. So men are at much higher risk and they are much more likely to be, I hate to use the word successful, but that's really what it is. They're much more likely to complete suicide on an attempt than women are. Women are much more likely to use less lethal means than men. So it's just paying attention to those sorts of things and listening and making sure that the person knows you're listening.
This topic has been talked about and brought up a lot recently, across the board, across the nation, in all media outlets. I don't know if it's from the pandemic or I mean it's a lot of things that bring it to everyone's top of mind. And this being Mental Health Awareness Month, a lot, you can see all the blogs and watch the videos and you see the stories. How do we get past just let's talk about it and let's have an article on our website about it, or why is it so important that we take it past this discussion tonight, and how do we take it past the discussion and actually make that positive difference? I know that may be a very tough question to answer, but that's what I wonder.
Mandy had touched on being able to identify. So with the young kids, it's really important to allow them to identify the emotions. We're really quick to use anger, but there's also sadness, there's also joy, grief, happiness. There's so many emotions that we really don't touch on at a young age, and help being able to self-regulate, self-aware of our emotions, and being able to understand that I'm having this reaction, and now how do I deal with that? And being able to cipher that is so important at a young age, and it would come naturally as an adult if we were more, aware of it. So kind of talking with your kids and allowing them, we have 4-H at home that you can look up, and of activities to do, of like cutting out different faces in the magazine and pasting them of like, this is a sad face and this is a happy face and this is what joy looks like to them. And being able to identify some of them emotions is very beneficial as far as being able to cope and deal with a lot of anxiety and depression, and just having that voice, having their voice and knowing that they have it.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, so for adults, coping with the emotion that they're actually feeling instead of processing the emotion they felt because they felt that way. So if you are feeling sad and then get mad because you're sad, you start processing the anger and not the sadness. So a lot of times people end up kind of skipping over the emotion that they're really feeling and that's really causing them the stress into guilt or anxiety or distress or fear. And what they really are is sad that they might lose their farm, or maybe they are mad, but then they feel guilty because they're mad, so they start processing the guilt instead of processing the anger. And then all of that just kind of gets shoved down into this box that doesn't ever get opened, because if we open it, then we have to deal with all of it. So yeah, it's a process, and you're absolutely right, because if you train kids to do it when they're young, it's second nature to them. And so one of the best things that adults can do is to model that behavior for the children and young people in their lives, because if they do, they're breaking down that barrier for those kids as they get older, and then they may not have to deal with these things to that extent as they get older.
And going off both of these guys, anger is an outward expression of an inner fear. When I taught school, children would be angry, and I wished that I would have had the mental health knowledge back then to be able to ask them, what are you afraid of? And there are 3 root fears, and that's abandonment, rejection, and fear of failure or the unknown. And a lot with farming families, they get very upset because, and you see them get angry when equipment breaks down, or get set off when a cow dies, or something along those lines, and they're afraid of failure. And the same thing that you guys talked about is teaching these children young how to deal with those failures and how to be able to pick yourself up and use those failures as a stepping stone to move on and progress, because life goes on. It does. And it's all about perspective and those coping skills. And a lot of trauma is learned behaviors. Those learned behaviors need to be changed to more positive behaviors instead of those angry, toxic behaviors that's what we see in these in a lot of these children growing up. Is because of the lack of knowledge from inside the home of how to do things differently.
Ladies, we've got just a few more minutes. Is there anything else that you want to share with our viewers? This has been absolutely eye-opening and quite incredible.
I did want to mention that kind of across the board with what we've been talking about, there's a lot of diversity within the agriculture community, and not everyone, of course, is going to have access to the same resources or have the same kind of experiences. And so especially when you get into the Delta region with, especially the Southeast Delta region with row crop communities, there's a large proportion of farmers of color in that area who are going to have access to and need different resources than what are available in other parts of the state. Financial services are going to be a little bit different depending on what commodity you grow and what kind of producer you are. Women in agriculture are going to have different needs than some men in agriculture. If you're an urban farmer, you're going to need different things than folks who live in more rural communities. So I think a lot of it is going to be kind of finding the resources that fit your need. And one of the places that I always tell people to start, and I mean, this is a shameless plug, of course, for all of the Division of Ag folks who have been on this, but starting with your county extension office is always a good place to start. In Farm Bureau, other places like that are all over the state are going to be able to kind of connect people with those sorts of resources based on what their actual needs are, rather than just kind of these starting broad and then funneling down. So.
All right, thank you. And it's our goal well, we have lots of goals tonight, but one of our main focuses was to show that farmers are not alone, and that yes, we sit up here on the desk and have all of these resources, but these resources are for all of our Arkansas farmers. The problem can be this big or it can be this big, but it's for everybody and it's available for everybody. So thank you, ladies. Farmers and ranchers deserve our respect and our help. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now to talk about this crucial topic. Thank you to my panelists, and thank you to all of those Arkansas farmers, and thank you to all of our viewers. Good night.
This program is funded through a Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network grant provided by the United States Department of Agriculture and administered by the Arkansas Department of Agriculture.